Alright y'all, it is already the end of the month again, which means it is time for another reading wrap-up video. And as you can tell, I have had the most successful reading month I've ever had. This month, I read a total of 11 books, which for me is absolutely insane. So out of the 11 books, I had 5 romance, 3 dystopian, 1 magical realism, 1 thriller, and 1 memoir, which I would say is a pretty good range of books for September. Okay, I'm going to give my reviews and ratings in order in which I read them this month. So the first one was the surprise of the decade for me. I was expecting to not really like this book at all, and I wound up rating it a 5 stars. So this book is When You Were Mine by Rebecca Searle, and this was one of the few books that my boyfriend chose out for me when we went to Barnes & Noble on our anniversary. And this book is said to be a Romeo and Juliet retelling, which I sort of disagree with. I think it's more inspired by the story of Romeo and Juliet, and if you've ever read the story by Shakespeare, I actually have not, but then you might remember this one character named Rosaline who Romeo was with right before he met Juliet, which this follows very similar to that. Instead of Romeo, his name's Rob in this, and basically we're following our main character Rosaline in a modern and slightly inspired by Romeo story. And honestly, some of the quotes in this book, the way that she wrote the characters' feelings and thoughts down on paper, I actually related to, and it was written so well. And obviously you can guess little bits and pieces of what is inspired by the original story. This was so fast, so fun, and it literally had me giggling. 5 stars all the way. Highly recommend it. Okay, and then the next 2 books I'm going to do together since they are the last 2 books in a series. Unfortunately, I only have the first and third book on paperback. I will get the second one eventually, but as you can see, it is Insurgent and Allegiant by Veronica Roth, which is part of the Divergent series. I really wanted to read this series, partially because one of my friends told me that I should read it, and partially because I feel like it's where a lot of people started their reading journey, and it's just like a staple, you know? And I really don't want to say too much about the plot of the book since it is book 2 and 3 in the series, but I can say for one thing, I probably will not read 4's book, which I think is not a sequel, spin-off, prequel. I'll have to fact check myself on that one. But overall, I rated Insurgent a 3 stars and Allegiant 3.5 stars. I definitely enjoyed this book a lot more. The plot of this really intrigued me. And I really liked the way that the second book flowed into the third one. It was such a perfect setup for the plot. And the ending of this, low-key almost had me in tears. I was not expecting the ending. There was plot twist after plot twist. I saw some things coming, definitely did not see other things coming, and I'm still not a fan of 4. I did actually watch the movies of these afterwards, and I'm very sad that there's not a part 2 to this movie. I understand, but overall, I think Allegiant was my favorite in this series. On to a few more romances. This book has to be my most anticipated read of the entire year, which I'm sure you can already guess it. It actually matches me right now. It is Daydream by Hannah Grace. What else would it be? So the whole Maple Hill series takes place within this friend group, and we met Henry in the first book, Icebreaker, and just the way that Hannah Grace wrote him made us all so excited for his book. So this book follows Henry and Hallie. Henry was a player, a hockey boy in his junior year of college, and Hallie is just a bookworm. She's a people pleaser. She takes care of her family and doesn't really know how to take care of herself. And I related to her on so many levels. I have quite a bit of this book tabbed actually, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. I really did enjoy it. The only thing that fell flat for me was the fact that it was so long. I feel like we could have cut some parts out, some parts dragged along a little bit, but I also really enjoyed the contrast between this and Icebreaker, because Icebreaker was super smutty and it started off with like a one-night stand, but this is a slow burn, which is a very different plotline than I was expecting, and I actually really enjoyed that. I've heard a lot of complaints about this book having too much or over communication, but I feel like that's why I enjoyed this book. To each their own. This next one is another romance, and it is none other than Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the second book in an interconnected standalone series, and if you can just see how much I have tapped in this book. If that doesn't tell you my rating, this was a 5-star book. Every book I've read by her has been 5 stars, and I need to read every other book that she has. So I did read the other 2 books in the series. I know I read them out of order. But I feel like in the first book, Part of Your World, you got little bits and pieces of Brianna, who is our main character, and I found that she was just so comical. She always had something to say, some sort of comeback, and I love that because that is 100% me. And I feel like all of her books are so vastly different with their plot lines, but they still pack the same punch, and that's why I love it so much. Brianna's going through some pretty tough things in her life, and then all of a sudden this doctor named Jacob comes in and she is told that he is going to try and take her position. And I don't want to say too much just because I think it's really fun to go into it blind, but he writes her a letter, and the letters in this book had me sold as soon as I read the first one. I would check trigger warnings on this book because it does talk very deeply about anxiety, but I think it is very well represented in this book. And just overall, the character development of them two individually and together was written so well. I love this one. The next book I actually listened to, and it is a memoir written by Lauren Graham, which was talking as fast as I can from Gilmore Girls to Gilmore Girls. And since it is fall time, watching the show Gilmore Girls just makes sense. And I'm currently in the middle of rewatching it, so I just figured reading or listening to this book would just be absolutely perfect. It's short, it's sweet, and it is so Lorelai coded. So in this book, it's actually narrated by her, and she talks about each and every stage of the show Gilmore Girls and then also the spin-off show. And basically we go through the journey of how nobody thought that Gilmore Girls was actually going to be a successful show, and now it's at the point that it is now. So it was just really fun to just hear her experiences and with her co-stars, and just I really enjoyed this one. And then this next one. I read The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susan Collins, which is the prequel book to the Hunger Games series. And I wound up rating it a 2.75 stars. It was not for me, and I don't think it is anything against the book. I think it's against the character. This book is basically a villain origin story of how President Snow, that we all know and not love from the Hunger Games, grew up and became the man that he is. I will say this book is extremely long. It is like 517 pages, which was very long. I feel like for me, a lot of parts dragged. Like I thought it was almost over and I was nearly halfway through. So I will say I had to read this book because Hamish's book is coming out next year, I think. And I am so excited for Hamish's book. I just want to know more of his story, and I figured I had to read this first before I could read Sunrise on the Reaping, I think is what it's called. So you best believe I will be reading that once it comes out. This next one was a bit of a wild card. It's also another romance because I'm obsessed with romance, and it is Lease on Love by Fallon Ballard. I love how floppy the book is. I just have to point that out. And I picked this up not knowing anything about it. I've never seen it, I never heard the title, and I wound up giving it a 3 stars. In this book, our main character Sadie is having a little bit of a hard time in life. She's just trying to get by and figure out what her next move is, and then all of a sudden she, in a very funny way, meets this guy named Jack, and they become roommates. And now Jack is very reserved and quiet, shy. He doesn't really talk too much, he doesn't really say much about him until the story goes on more and you come to find out why that is. But yeah, overall it was really cute. I really loved the development in especially the guy character. I will say the humor in this book was really enjoyable, and many parts of this book have pages of just text messages, which I feel like made the book fly by. It was so fast, it was so fun. The only thing I really didn't care for was the third act conflict, which I understand, but I didn't personally see it as big of a deal as they did. All right, on to the one thriller that I read, which is Never Lie by Frida McFadden. This was a 4.5 stars for me. I really enjoyed this one, and I definitely would recommend this as a winter read because it does take place during a snowstorm. And this book basically follows our 2 newlyweds, which is Trisha and Ethan, and they're going to try and find the house of their dreams. Some mysterious things happen, and that was the house of Adrienne Hale, who has now since passed, and she was a psychologist, and you come to find out a lot of little mysterious clues about her life and her house. And let me tell you, I so thought that I guessed the ending of this. I really truly believed I knew what was going to happen. And I got one little thing. I did not guess a single one of the plot twists that happened at the very end of this book. I was a little bit confused at some parts, I will say, but overall, I'm excited for more Frida books. This next one is a very atmospheric read, and I had to read it during fall time, and it is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Last year, I read The 7-Year Slip by her, and I fell in love with it. It is still to this day one of my top 3 favorite books that I've ever read. And in this book, we follow Florence Day, who is a ghostwriter, and she just went through a pretty bad breakup, which leads her to believe that romance is dead. Until she meets a new editor, and then next thing you know, he shows up as a ghost at her dad's funeral. And I will say this didn't give me the 5-star feeling that 7-Year Slip did, but this was a solid 4-star read for me. And truly, I had no idea how this book was going to end because of the conflict of her being alive and him obviously being dead. But I really loved it, and I thought overall it was just so sweet, and it was very, very funny. She's definitely another one of my auto-buy authors. All right, we are on to the very last book that I read in September, and this was also another very anticipated read, and it is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. And I did just finish this like a few hours ago, and I'm a little undecided on my rating. And the reason being is because this book is categorized under magical realism, and I love that genre. But there was no like magic actually used in the book, just more like wishes coming true and like coincidences and full circles, if that makes sense. But if I didn't know that prior to reading this book, it would have been a 5 stars because I loved this book. But I think for that reason, this book is a 4.75 stars, which is still incredible, and I highly recommend this book. The way that I felt for these characters, our main character Lucy has gone through a really, really tough life, and all she really wants to do is adopt this boy named Christopher because he has also had a pretty rough childhood, and she just wants to make his life better than she remembers her childhood. But due to many reasons, she is not able to foster or adopt Christopher, but she has a chance to win a one-of-a-kind book written by none other than Jack Masterson, who wrote the entire Clock Island series, which is a big deal in this book. So she competes against 3 other people to try and win this one copy. The way that Meg Schaefer wrote Christopher, he was such a sweet, cute kid. Oh, I loved him in this. I loved how deep and thoughtful this book was, but also how like carefree and fun it was. But I highly recommend you pick this up this fall or winter time. So those are all the books that I read in the month of September. Gotta say, that was super successful, and I had a lot of really, really good reads. Oh, that I'd rather not throw around. But feel free to comment down below any of your favorite reads that you read this month, or any recommendations that you have for me. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.